Today, we're breaking down the first 3 days of Broncos Camp. What have been the key observations? What have been the takeaways? We're also unveiling a new segment. You are listening to the Huddle Up Podcast.
Welcome to the Huddle Up Podcast, your go-to show for all things Broncos.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up Podcast presented by Mile High Huddle in 24/7 Sports. I am your host, Chad Jensen. With me is my co-host, my partner in crime. He is your Denver Broncos reporter for 24/7 Sports. He is Zack Kelberman. Zack, the wait is over. We finally have some real events. Football is taking place out on the grass at Dove Valley. Camp is officially underway. It feels good, my brother.
Finally, football is back in Dove Valley, and it's been a pretty interesting 3 days. We'll have a lot to talk about today, but I'm glad that football is around the corner. We got the Pro Football Hall of Fame game coming up this week, and football is here, so it's definitely exciting.
Absolutely. We got football all the way through till the end of this year, so each weekend, something to look forward to, and this is just, we're getting to the beginning of that time of year that I think most of us live for.
Yeah, it's definitely my favorite time of year, and a lot of Broncos fans' favorite time of year.
You guys follow the show on Twitter, Huddle Up Pod, and make sure you take some time, if you've not done it, to leave a creative review wherever you listen to the show, but especially if it's iTunes, Stitcher, iHeart, YouTube. Take some time. Let us know what you think. Give us your feedback. Make it creative. Great way to help support the show. And one last piece of business before we jump into things here. We got to say thank you to our sponsor of today's show, Audible. You guys get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/huddleup. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from, whether you're on an iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. audibletrial.com/huddleup. You've heard me talk about it before. For those of you who are big readers, we don't always have the time to sit down and turn the pages on the books that we want to read, but Audible allows us to get these books under our belt while we're multitasking, while we're doing other things. And even if you're not a big reader, there's always something for everybody on Audible. I mean, there's football books, there's nonfiction books, there's fiction books, there's everything you can imagine, over 180,000 different titles to choose from. And if you love listening to podcasts, which obviously you do, that's why you're listening to the show, I can promise you, you will dig listening to Audible. And we're giving you a chance to try it out for free and get a free audiobook to go along with it for 30 days. So go to audibletrial.com/huddleup, pull the trigger, sign up, come back, let us know how you liked it. Thank you, Audible. All right, so we got a lot to get to today. Obviously, the Denver Broncos kicked off training camp over the weekend. And as we are recording this, they got 3 practices under their belt. Now, we've already learned vastly more, Zach, about this team than we knew when last we were able to talk to our listeners. So we'll get to kind of some of the observations here, some of the immediate takeaways thus far. And I think number one on the list has got to be Case Keenum. By all appearances, and granted, we understand that it's training camp, it's practice. The shells went on for the first time on Monday, and then Tuesday, the team is going to be in full pads. So, it's the tip of the iceberg. We're just scratching the surface. But the first 3 days, Case Keenum looks like the real deal. I mean, the offense, Zach, has been the aggressor. You got guys making plays. You got defensive guys talking after practice about being on their heels. And, nobody likes to get beaten, whether it's an individual or in a team period. But you can see that the defense is they're kind of tickled over the fact that they don't really know what's coming next from the offense. And it's a refreshing change based on the last 2 years of how bad things have been offensively.
It's so weird to me to see the defense owned by the Broncos offense. Usually you're accustomed to seeing Trevor Siemian and Paxton Lynch get swallowed up by the Broncos defense, but it's been the power shift has taken hold in training camp this year with Case Keenum, who's just been phenomenal, worth every penny of his $36 million contract. This is why they got him, as a veteran leader, a true commander of the huddle, and he's really lived up to billing so far. One thing that stood out to me is that he's completed bomb after bomb after bomb on this no-fly zone secondary, and they've beaten Chris Harris Jr. 3 practices in a row now. And I know it's practice. I know To quote AI, we're talking about practice here, but it's encouraging to see that the Broncos offense can pull their own weight and not rely solely on the defense to get the job done this season. Case Keenum has been magnificent, and I'm so looking forward to seeing him when the bullets start flying for real.
I mean, we're used to seeing Broncos quarterbacks the last 2 years be gun shy, hold on to the ball too long, take too long to make decisions, and just lack that confidence to distribute the ball, get it out on time. And so it's made the offensive line look worse. It's made skill position players look worse than they are. And you're starting to see, I mean, as you said, you go back and one of the best highlights that I can recommend to fans who aren't able to attend and watch practice is usually about late afternoon is about how long it takes. You can go to the Denver Broncos YouTube channel, and they always put a little cut-up of the top plays, usually about 1.5 to 2.5 minute highlight video. And you can kind of see what's taken place. And the Broncos offense, I mean, usually what you've seen from those type of videos in years past are big defensive plays taking place. And this year, it's, as you said, bomb after bomb, guys winning on fade routes in red zone work, guys scoring touchdowns. It's absolutely refreshing.
And one thing that stood out to me is that, like you said, Case Keenum has made everyone else around him better. Couldn't talk for a second there. But what it makes for Keenum is that he has more offensive weapons. The Broncos did a good job surrounding their new starting quarterback with enough weapons to take hold. Now they have Cortland Sutton. Now they have Deshaun Hamilton. They have Jake Butt, who's fully healthy now. Yep. To go along with two great receivers in Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, you can never have too many pass catchers, too many weapons. And who do you cover? As an opposing defense, if the Broncos offense is getting the better of their defensive counterparts, what opposing team, how do you cover this offense? Yeah. I know it's early, I know it's practice, and I know it's drills and this and that, but it's very encouraging that Case Keenum is the spark, and he's really exceeding expectations to this point.
He doesn't have to be Peyton Manning in order for this team to win, and I've written it this way a few times since the Broncos signed him, but I see him as having the type of impact that Jake Plummer had when Jake first came back in 2003. And even though it didn't end well for Jake, there's some extenuating circumstances that weren't necessarily his fault as to why things ended the way they did for him in Denver. But what happened with Jake Plummer is he comes to town, the Broncos go to the playoffs 3 straight years, culminating in an AFC Championship game of which he plays his worst game basically as a Bronco, and they failed to advance to go on to the Seahawks, which I think they would have beat the Seahawks if they would have beaten the upstart Pittsburgh Steelers with a young Ben Roethlisberger, but that's a story for another time. I can see the Broncos following a similar track. They're not going to be world beaters all of a sudden with Case Keenum, but Case Keenum puts him in the conversation. I think just like with Jake Plummer, those first couple of years, they kind of pushed from the bottom at the wild card level. They'd get to the wild card round. Both times they got knocked out by Peyton Manning, for Broncos fans who can remember back to that period. The next year, though, they finally made a big push, got to the AFC Championship game. So if Case Keenum can have that type of effect, which I see happening, I mean, that's good things. That's a marked turnaround for a Broncos team that's coming off 2 consecutive seasons of missing the playoffs and 5-11.
Great minds, because I've written the same thing extensively, that they don't need Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers. They don't need an all-pro. It would be nice to have that at quarterback. They need a stable veteran hand who won't turn the football over, can make plays, and win games on the strength of his shoulder. They can win because of him, not in spite of him. And that's what you've seen in 2016. They went 9-7 because of their defense. Last year they were 5-11 because they had no offense. To have both things kind of come into place, it's going to give the Broncos, at least having Case Keenum, a couple extra wins this year. And then you never know. They catch a break, they can go 8-8, 9-7, 10-6. To have the quarterback under center, like you said, they don't have to be world beaters. They just have to be competent. And if you can just avoid turnovers and make enough plays, this team can definitely go places.
I think that's fair. It's a fair assessment. And speaking, you mentioned it. I mean, you're seeing weapons come out of the woodworks at training camp right now, especially at the wide receiver position. You got guys making plays left and right. One of the guys who's just been absolutely on fire, he looks literally reborn, is Emmanuel Sanders. And really, there have been times he looks like the best player on the field, and he's 30 years old. So, you wrote about it, I don't know, whatever it was, about a month back, kind of in the dead time of the NFL offseason. Emmanuel Sanders questioned last year whether or not he even wanted to keep playing football, or questioned his desire for football. And that seems to be changing. He's all of a sudden, he's got some pep to his step. He's talking like a leader. He's producing out on the field. And we've seen what type of impact a motivated and a passionate Emmanuel Sanders can have on this Broncos offense if you think back to his first 3 years with the club. So I'm excited to see how that relationship can continue to blossom, especially once we get into the season.
He's admitted on a number of occasions now that Case Keenum re-sparked his love of the game and re-sparked his motivation. And he said it yesterday. He gushed about Case Keenum and he said, we got our quarterback. We can check that off the list now. This Broncos offense and these playmakers and receivers are divas. We all know that. And Emmanuel Sanders especially. Great player, but a little bit of a personality. He was not happy with the Broncos quarterback in the last couple years. Yeah. And how could you blame him? Going from Peyton Manning to Trevor Siemian. It's going from the penthouse to the outhouse there.
That's right.
So now that he has a competent quarterback in place, he's so re-energized, and you can see it in his play and in practice. And he did question his love of the game. But I also think a part of that is to prove to the NFL, because he probably knows the writing's on the wall here. He was lucky to be brought back this year with his hefty contract. He'll probably be playing in a new team next season, more than likely, if they keep Demaryius Thomas. So I think he wants to prove to the NFL, and not only the Broncos, and he said it too, that he still has gas left in the tank and he can still be a playmaker. But same thing with Shane Ray, who we'll touch on in just a second here. The more they can get out of him for motivation and positive play, it only benefits the team and the players. So he has looked great, and you can't have too many pass-catching weapons on that offense.
I mean, before training camp, honestly, I think everyone felt, who analyzes, and fans too, I mean, everyone felt like 2018 was as good as, I mean, you could just count on this probably being his last year in Denver. But the way he's playing, if he can translate that, convert that momentum into the season, I'm not going to bank on it, but there's a chance he could stick around and make that remaining $10.25 million that's on his Broncos contract. Because if you look at it, you know, they have a decision to make with both of those wideouts at the top of the depth chart. But, I mean, they've got Cortland Sutton and Deshaun Hamilton on the cheap for the next 4 years. So if he does enough to really help advance this offense, and you see the Broncos offense finish even in the top 10, I could see the Broncos making sacrifices at other places to keep Emmanuel Sanders. And that, I think, would include also Demaryius Thomas, health willing. I think if you see Emmanuel Sanders have a big year, you're probably going to see Demaryius Thomas as well have put up some good stats.
I think these both receivers are 1,000-yard potential in this season with a competent quarterback. But I think whether they keep one or both of them will come down to the development of Hamilton and Sutton, who are clones of Sanders and Thomas respectively. So it depends on their play, but also depends on the development, how fast those rookie receivers can learn in this offense. And by all accounts, they've come along very well so far. I
mean, if Demaryius and Sanders can each get 1,000 yards in 2016, catching balls predominantly from Trevor Siemian.
Right.
I mean, sky's the limit, I would think, with Case Keenum. But another outfit that has generated a lot of excitement at training camp has been the offensive line. Now, just a couple days, the day before actually training camp opened, we had some semi-ominous news from Vance Joseph. We were expecting, from comments they had made earlier in the season, or offseason, I should say, that Ronald Leary and Jared Valdir were going to be good to go, hit the ground running when camp opened. But yet we found out on Friday when Vance Joseph spoke at the media barbecue that they were going to kind of be eased back into action and receive basically half reps to kind of start. Well, it hasn't really turned out that way. They were inserted in the starting lineup. We finally got to see what Denver's vision for that starting five looks like. And basically, to wit, what it is Garrett Bowles, left tackle, Leary, left guard, Matt Paradis, center, of course. Connor McGovern getting the first swing at the plate at right guard. It's his job to lose. And then Valdir at right tackle. And so far they've been receiving enormous compliments on both sides of the ball, but it's been particularly gratifying in my mind to see guys like Derek Wolfe, who does not hand out compliments for nothing, say nice things and compliment this unit that has been beleaguered over the last 2 years.
I mean, the Broncos defense, they're not stupid. They know the Broncos offensive line. They've had some definitely the weak spots on that line with men like Watson, Stevenson, Max Garcia. So they recognize that as a whole they're better. But for this position and for this group as a whole, it really comes down to chemistry, continuity, and then gelling together. I'm excited for them on paper, but I want to see them play some games together, get some chemistry going, some continuity, and they can build together because they have Leary moving to a new spot, they have a new right tackle, they have a new right guard, and while they're all good on paper, and they should be a massive upgrade on what you saw last year without the turnstiles in place, I do think that I want to see them develop, and that's why I think Vance Joseph didn't wait to insert them. I think he wants to get them in from day one and let them go, protect Case Keenum, let him go run block for the running backs. Yep. So it's on paper it looks good, but I want to see what happens when the pads go on and the games start counting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting too is going back to Derek Wolfe. What he pointed to, he said that first of all, last year, he's used to just beating dudes in one-on-one drills, in team period, just getting by whatever offensive lineman was in front of him, and that hasn't been the case. Each rep has been hard fought every time through 3 practices. And what he attributed to, he talked about footwork, he talked about technique, and he pointed to this new approach the Broncos took this year in assigning a coach to work specifically with the interior, the guards and the centers, and a coach to work specifically with the tackles. And, it's kind of a different approach as it relates to the NFL, what Vance Joseph decided to do there. But the early returns, it's looking like it's actually making a difference, Zach.
Yeah, I wasn't thrilled about that. I thought it was unnecessarily divvying up the duties, but credit to Vance Joseph. He found a great guy in Sean Kugler to handle the interior, and they have Chris Strausser to handle the edge protectors. But it's worked out for them. But again, I want to see it come together on paper because this time last year, everyone was happy about Menelik Watson, the pickup they got from Oakland. And before that, it was Stevenson. So I want to see what happens in preseason and regular season. I want to see them come together, but it's a good start so far.
Now, you brought him up, Shane Ray, obviously full go this time. Quite the surprise, quite the shocker. Just a few weeks ago, we were all expecting Shane Ray to basically be out for the duration of training camp, the duration of preseason, and probably to miss the first couple of regular season games. And yet we found out on the doorstep of training camp that he decided to forego his surgery on the wrist, and he's been doing a specific type of rehab to get ready. The team has also put together kind of a makeshift splint for that wrist, which in application, in practice, has caused him to have very little pain, very little discomfort, according to him. So it's been good to see Shane Ray. Vance Joseph was talking about how explosive he looks, and with 4 guys now, and this is just a quick aside, we have yet to really hear anything positive or negative about Jeff Holland. But looking at those 4 guys, Von Miller, Shane Ray, Bradley Chubb, and Shaq Barrett, this looks like a unit that's going to be 4 deep and at full strength week 1 against Seattle.
You saw Shane Ray come out in the first practice, and he ragdolled Garrett Bowles, threw him around. And that's a 330-pound lineman. So it's encouraging to see that Shane Ray is back to full health, and he is so motivated right now. He has the biggest chip on his shoulder to show that the Broncos made a mistake declining his 5th-year option, to show he was worthy of that being a first-round pick, to show he can be a starter in the NFL. And he's motivated. He's ready to go, and he's ready to reclaim that starting spot. He's not ready to give that up to Chubb just yet. So it's all systems go for Shane Ray. I was surprised. You were surprised. The fans were surprised. He avoided his 4th surgery. Rest and rehab was the key for him, and I hope he doesn't re-aggravate it. But as of right now, I think he is penciled in at OLB, and he will rotate with Chubb, but it's good news for him so far. And like you said, this Broncos edge rushing unit is going to be so terrifying because they can even rotate guys who would be starters on other teams. Yep. That's who they have as backups. So it's going to be a nightmare for opposing teams, and it's to be really fun for us to watch.
I'm just looking forward to seeing that NASCAR unit, man, with Von Miller on one edge. You got Shane maybe on the other edge. You got Bradley Chubb kicks inside to rush as an interior, like from the 3-tech or 5-tech. Just unbelievable what the Broncos are going to be able to throw at opposing offenses in 2018. So let's hope that momentum can continue through training camp and into the preseason. And speaking of momentum, we got to talk about Courtland Sutton. This guy established himself as the star of OTAs, this rookie, just about 6 weeks back. He's found a way to carry that over into training camp. He's making cornerback teammates look silly at times. Guys like Brendan Langley and Isaac Yiad, he's doing them no favors. But how good? It's been a while since Broncos fans are once bitten, twice shy, right? Like they've never seen John Elway draft a wide receiver that can come in and make an impact. And yet here's Courtland Sutton just making phenomenal catch after catch, just highlight reel after highlight reel type of catch. Broncos fans want to get excited. I can sense it in the comments and the engagement. They want to get stoked on this kid, but it's just training camp. How good could this kid be, you think?
Well, he's also wearing Cody Latimer's number, so Broncos fans are a little gun shy there. But no, he can be.
That was an odd choice. Real quick, why the heck did he pick 14? I don't get that, because wasn't 16 available?
Yeah, Benny Fowler left, so yeah.
Anyway.
I don't know, but maybe he's thinking he can break the curse. But I think he can. I think he could be the first great Broncos receiver that Elway really built up as a second-round pick, and he can be a number one. He wants to emulate Demaryius Thomas, and I think he really can be. He drew comparisons to Thomas to Alshon Jeffrey. He can be that true number one, and if they can have a third number one on this offense, that is downright scary. He mossed Langley in minicamp. He owned Yadam in OTAs. He is making, like you said, the cornerbacks look silly, and he's getting even the better of the veteran corners like Roby and Chris Harris Jr. He's just a monster red zone target, huge catch radius, big body, just a big red zone threat. And I love the pick when they stole him in the second round. He had a first round grade. So he can be – the sky's truly his limit. He could be a number one, but right now they need him to be that number three for the moment. And in that role, he's going to be downright terrifying for Case Keenum to lob the ball up to.
I mean, you see it, and this is one of my complaints with Demaryius Thomas. I mean, this is a phenomenally big wide receiver. He's lost weight this year. He's actually quite trimmed down, and that's been a theme over the last 2 years, actually. But, he's used to playing like he's 6'3", and he's usually around 225 to 230, which is huge for a wide receiver. If you go back and watch the NFL Films production of the Tebow victory over the Steelers when DT took that slant pattern 80 yards in overtime and beat the Steelers, there's a comment when Big Ben first takes the field, because remember, that's 2011, that's Demaryius Thomas' second year. He was a first-round pick a year earlier, but he's still relatively unknown. And when Big Ben takes the field, they're doing warm-ups, and there's a little scene where he's like, damn, dude, who's that 88? Is that a tight end? I'm like, no, that's a wideout. He's like, damn, that dude's big. And he is, and yet you never really have seen, I shouldn't say never because it's an absolute, but very rarely do you see Demaryius Thomas use his size to an advantage, and yet you're seeing Courtland Sutton as a rookie in training camp box the defenders out, use that size as a weapon, as a tool in which to create separation and attack the ball, and it's working. And you've got a quarterback now in Case Keenum who knows how to fit the ball in, who has been tremendously accurate, especially thus far through camp. I mean, sky's the limit with this kid. It's just a matter of how do you work him into the rotation in a way that does not compromise, the chemistry with Thomas, with Sanders. And I think the answer to that question is he's going to be a guy that's going to see a lot of snaps in the red zone as a rookie.
Yeah, if they can just use him in that role when they get inside the 20, just to throw the ball up in the end zone, that could be a success. But what I like about Sutton is that you can move him around. He can play outside. He can play the slot. You put him outside, he's bigger than a cornerback, and you can't match up with him there. Put him in the slot, he'll beat a safety, and he's too fast for a linebacker. So he's really a movable chess piece for a guy his size. And he doesn't have to be a number one on this team right now. If he can just come on the field on passing situations, in red zone opportunities, he can provide instant, immediate contributions to this offense and give Case Keenum yet another weapon, a Thomas clone, and you really can't go wrong with that.
Another guy who's had some success, at least on Monday, Jake Butt. He'd actually been kind of quiet through day 1 and 2 of camp. But on Monday, he absolutely exploded with multiple touchdown grabs in the team period red zone drills. And I don't know, similar to what we've seen how we're kind of projecting Courtland Sutton as a rookie, I think the biggest impact that Jake Butt can make in his first year really in the NFL is in the red zone. I mean, I can see Case Keenum and Bill Musgrave finding ways to use him, obviously, between the 20s, but I think he can be a big asset when the Broncos get into the red zone.
Yeah, I think he's going to win this job by default, too, because Hireman is injured now, and he hasn't really proven much. And you have Austin Traylor, and you have a rookie in Troy Fumagalli who's coming off surgery. So I think Butt will be the tight end one by default.
Yep.
And he hasn't really popped so far, but we have a lot of camp and preseason to go. But like you said, he's just another pass-catching red zone weapon for this offense. And like I said earlier, how do you cover everyone? You have Demaryius Thomas, Sanders, Sutton, Hamilton, but you have Devontae Booker as a pass-catching running back. How do you cover everyone? You cannot. So I think based on that fact alone, based on the numbers game, Butt will find success primarily in the red zone.
All it takes with that equation you just laid out there is a quarterback that can find the mismatches and exploit them. And I think Case Keenum is at a point in his development where he is seeing the field like a true 7-year veteran, and it's going to pay dividends for this offense. But I don't want to downplay it too much because Jake Butt did have a very productive Monday. It was definitely his day 3 was his biggest day of training camp thus far. But another dark horse, another guy who's been making some noise at tight end is Austin Traylor, who's been a surprisingly productive receiving tight end thus far through camp. So keep an eye on him as we move forward. And then lastly here, before we transition out, segue, Carlos Henderson. Obviously, we learned from Coach Joseph. You wrote about this over the last couple of days. The coach and several of Carlos Henderson's teammates have tried to reach out to him. For those who might have missed it, he was put on the did not report list in the couple days leading up to camp. He's got some kind of intense family situation going on is all we really know, something extremely private, but obviously some drama. So that's a real situation he's attached to here. The team is ready to welcome him back to camp as soon as he's ready for football, but it doesn't sound like he's been too responsive, Zach, to his teammates who've tried to reach out to him. Is it time? I know how I feel about this, but do you feel like it's time for fans to start kind of emotionally writing off Carlos Henderson at this point?
I think it's a little too soon to throw in the towel because he hasn't even taken one snap in a Broncos uniform in a regular season game. I feel bad for the kid. I mean, you couldn't script a worse start to an NFL career than Henderson's. He missed his entire rookie year. Then he was popped for marijuana in January. Then he sat out the spring with a hamstring injury. Now he has a family issue that popped up. And the Broncos have taken a tough love approach with him. Joseph has called him out on a number of occasions now, saying if he wants to make this team, he has to get healthy. If he wants to make the team, he has to come back to camp. And we don't know what the issue is, what his problem is. If it's a family problem, that's out of his control. And as disappointing as he is, and he was a third-round pick, you got to give him time because some things are bigger than football. And that's what Emmanuel Sanders said when he reached out to him. I would not count on anything, though. I would not expect anything. Anything the Broncos get out of Henderson this season, if at anything, would be the cherry on top of what they have in their receiving core. So is it time to throw in the towel? No. Is he a bust yet? No. But it's definitely veering in that direction. He's really off to a truly horrible start.
Listeners have heard me say this before, and especially those of you that have followed my writing over the years, but the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. It's not an absolute because some people change. It does happen. But the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And although we're hearing about this family situation, it sounds like something that's outside of his control. It's another piece to the puzzle. It's another piece to the pattern. And the problem with Carlos Henderson, as you said it, that he's had just can you have a worse start to a pro career?
No.
I don't think you can. But there's a pattern that has been built into that mosaic, if you will. It's not encouraging. And in fact, I think you can see the Broncos, they're continuing to talk about it because they're being asked by we in the media what's going on here with Carlos Henderson. But I think even they have already written Carlos Henderson off to a certain degree. And here's how you know why. The Broncos signed Philly Brown off the street. And Vance Joseph talked about it, I think it was Saturday after practice when he was asked about Philly Brown. He said, I don't have the quote directly in front of me because this kind of turned, I didn't have it prepared, my apologies. But he said, to paraphrase, something to the effect of, he had a conversation with Philly Brown and said, look, we signed you to make this team. The Broncos are fully, and we'll talk about Philly Brown here in just a few minutes, actually, when we go through the injury roundup. But the Broncos they signed Philly Brown because they expect him to make the team. That's wideout number 5 right there. If they keep 6, and that's if they do, it's going to be somebody who's been at training camp competing their asses off, not Carlos Henderson. So let's say Carlos Henderson shows up halfway through camp. Let's say he shows up 3/4 of the way through camp. I don't care when it is, but he shows up very late to the party. Yeah, he's a third-round pick, but the Broncos aren't going to just grandfather him a spot on the roster and shoot themselves in the foot when you got a guy like whoever it might be, Isaiah McKenzie, maybe it's Tim Patrick, maybe it's River Craycraft, whoever's been really showing out during training camp and preseason, that's who's going to get the nod. And then what do you do with Carlos Henderson? All you can do is waive him. You can't put him on injured reserve if he's not injured. You can't, you can waive him and try and sneak him onto the practice squad and thereby keep him within the organization, but they're starting to get to a slippery slope where it's going to spin out of their control to hold on to him if he doesn't find a way to punch in and get back. And you know what? Look, I understand things happen that are outside of our control, but Derek Wolfe, you can going back to the Broncos YouTube channel, go there. There's a fun little video. It's 2.5 minutes, something like that, of Broncos TV following him from home to arriving on campus for training camp. And he talked about the type of mindset as a pro that you have to have. And even Justin Simmons in a similar video talked the same thing. You have to be able to compartmentalize and shut off your personal life from your professional. When you're getting paid the big bucks, you have to be able to separate the two and move forward as a professional. And I just don't see this ever happening for Carlos Henderson. I'm sorry. I see this dude's time in Denver is already done. He's a bust. And I hope I'm wrong. I really do, because he's a third-round pick, and I was super high on him. I was stoked when the Broncos picked him. His tape at Louisiana Tech was phenomenal. But the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, and the Broncos are running out of options, and so is Carlos Henderson if he doesn't show up.
It's a shame, too, because earlier this offseason, he was really putting the work in after he was arrested. He was bulking up and he was running routes, and he was counted on, as Vance Joseph said, to be that number 3. They had very high hopes for him. It just didn't work out. And I think once the Broncos took 2 receivers in the draft, that was a big indictment on him and Isaiah McKenzie. Yep. They wanted to hedge their bets a little bit. But to your point, it's a great point that the Broncos players, his teammates right now, are busting their asses in training camp. They're sweating, they're grinding, they're bleeding. And you have a guy who's sitting away from out of the picture with a non-injury, and he comes back in the locker room and, listen, we've done all this and you're going to just come in and you're going to be on the 53? Right. That's not really fair. So you wonder how that affects chemistry. And even Emmanuel Sanders said yesterday he doesn't know if that would cause any tension. He doesn't know how the Broncos would welcome him back to that locker room. So it's definitely a tricky situation. I would not be surprised if he is indeed waived. Personally, though, I just think it's a little too soon to write him off just yet.
And I understand that he does represent a third-round pick by the team, and he's a phenomenally talented individual, but he's got to get it together between the years, and until he does that, he's not going to be able to help himself, and he's not going to be able to help this team. Now, here in just a second, Zach and I, we're going to parse through the injury roundup through 3 days of camp. We're going to unveil a new segment and, of course, take a couple questions from the mailbag. But first, we got to holler at you about why you need to become a Mile High Huddle 24/7 Sports VIP subscriber. Some of you might have missed it, but we ran a flash sale, I think it was Friday last week, in honor of training camp starting the next day. There was an opportunity to get 5 months for the price of one. It was 1 day, flash sales. We don't decide that, just so you know. The brass on the network decides when that's going to happen. We run it, and they tell us when it's going to be, how long it's going to be. This particular flash sale, 1 day only. So those of you that got in, welcome. We're glad to have you. Those of you who didn't, it's still not too late, because our approach to covering the Broncos, it's not just about reporting the news. As important as that is, we pride ourselves on being able to relay to you all the breaking news on the Broncos as it's happening in real time. But we really like to focus on breaking down the Broncos in depth, whether it's all 22 film reviews, X's and O's, deep dive player evaluation, and we save our best and most in-depth content for our VIP subscribers, our premium members. Now, to become a Mile High Huddle VIP, get access to 100% of our written analysis and our VIP insider forums, go to the website, click on the green banner at the top. You can choose the monthly or the annual option. Annual option saves you a few bucks over a year, but you'll be locked in. And from there, you get access to everything we produce, which includes any insider info we pick up along the way. And you guys know, we bust our humps to bring you the best Broncos coverage and analysis on the web, and we ask for your support by becoming a VIP subscriber. Pull the trigger. You have our word. You will not be disappointed. All right, let's go through the injury roundup here. Since camp started, there's been a couple of strikes by the injury bug. Monday was by far the worst. Here's how it's shaped up so far. Garrett Bowles, it was a scare on Monday. took a shot to the jaw and ended up going through concussion testing, but was cleared to play. So he left practice on a cart in the morning, but was back on the field for walkthroughs in the afternoon. So he seems to be good to go. Brandon Marshall, the linebacker, suffered a kind of a wrist tweak. He's already been cleared to return. They might play it a little bit safe with him just because they don't want to tempt fate this early in camp, but he too was back at walkthroughs per multiple reports. And then Philly Brown, I told you we were going to get to him. The Broncos signed him when they found out Carlos Henderson wasn't going to show, and also Jimmy Williams is contemplating his football future, didn't show. Philly Brown was signed, got to Denver, got to the weight room, bumped his head on some kind of weightlifting accident. He hit his head. He's actually in concussion protocol. So he actually suffered a concussion, okay? So we'll see him eventually, but it's probably not going to be this week. Maybe toward the end of the week, we'll see. And then you got Jeff Hireman, the tight end. You alluded to it. He missed Monday's practice. He was on the field, but he was watching from the sideline with some knee soreness. I don't know. Jeff Hireman, again, going back to the predictor thing, future behavior, past behavior. I don't know. You got to wonder about Jeff Hireman. And then lastly, you got Marcus Rios, the second-year former undrafted cornerback out of UCLA. Is dealing with a hip. He's day-to-day. So the Broncos have been nicked a little bit, Zach, but thankfully it hasn't been anything too serious thus far.
You thought the injury bug was biting hard today, but fortunately, it wasn't that bad. Garrett Bowles is one tough son of a gun. Remember last year when he looked like he broke his ankle, then he was practicing 4 days later?
Yep.
Nothing really kept this guy down. So thankfully, they're very high on him this year. They need him, and thankfully it wasn't worse. He's already cleared to return. The only player that's really out for an extended period is Jordan Taylor, who's on PUP after having hip surgery. That's the only player. Other than that, they're going to be mostly at full strength going into the preseason and, of course, the regular season. God willing, they don't suffer any more injuries. But the Philly Brown thing, to me, is crazy. He gets concussed by hitting his head on a weightlifting equipment.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's one of those summer stories that you can't make up. But other than that,
dog, you got to tone it down in the weight room, man.
He's going too hard in there.
Come on, dude. You got a football career to consider here, my brother. Just one of the more bizarre stories to come out of Dove Valley in recent years. A guy suffers a concussion in the weight room. But, hey, anything can happen. But let's turn to quarterback watch. It's been a while since we had something to talk about with regard to quarterback watch, and obviously we've talked about Keenum. And, quarterback watch, it's kind of lost some of its luster in that there is no open competition for the starting gig. But there's still plenty to talk about, including what we're hearing on Paxton Lynch and Chad Kelly. Now, one thing I thought was interesting, and I wrote about this on Monday, was Cecil Lammey of 104.3 The Fan tweeted the following. He said, quote, "I haven't seen Chad Kelly take a second-team rep yet in camp. Could have missed it, but that's my early observation. That being said, Lynch is still making the mistakes that plagued him. Batted passes, wild accuracy. Any move Kelly could make comes in the preseason." Close quote. So basically more of the same from Paxton Lynch, everything we've become accustomed to. Chad Kelly bringing up the rear on the third team, yet to be given second-team reps. Now, here's where it kind of gets weird, okay? Here's what Vance Joseph had to say about Chad Kelly and Paxton Lynch, but pay close attention, especially to what he has to say about Chad Kelly really quick.
I think Paxton's doing a good job with his footwork. He did a good job day 2 of going through progressions and finding the third and fourth guy in the progression. That's improvement for Paxton, obviously. He's completing the football. That's key. Chad, Chad's different. He's a playmaker. I mean, the dirty to play, if it's a dirty play, he makes it look clean. That's his strength. I mean, he's just a playmaker. So if it looks really muddy, he comes out and makes a play. That's what he does. But they're both playing good.
All right, so no second-team reps for Chad Kelly, Zach, but his coach compliments him over Lynch. What are we to make of this situation? He calls him a playmaker. He says that Chad is, quote, different. And then as it relates to Paxton Lynch, he's talking about like it's some great achievement that he's actually completing the football. Okay, and this is the weird football quarterback world in which we live in now, is the team constantly trying to prop up their former first-round pick. But I agree with Cecil. In my personal take, I agree that Chad Kelly's opportunity to climb the depth chart is not going to come till preseason. But what is your take? Is this a front office thing? I mean, is Elway just kind of strong-arming VJ into keeping Lynch with the twos for now?
I've said it on a number of occasions, and I've written about it, that the reason Paxton Lynch still has a job is because of Elway's ego, and is because he was a first-round pick. If he was a 5th, 6th rounder, he would have been cut this offseason.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't really take Joseph at his word, because this is a guy who spent most of the offseason talking up Paxton Lynch, saying he wants him to relax and just not worry about starting for whatever that meant.
Right.
So, I think it's still way too early. It's still in the infantile stage of camp. We have to see how the preseason is going to play out. But Lynch looked good on the first day of camp. He was completing some passes, and he's developed a rapport with Courtland Sutton in particular. Mm-hmm. But Chad Kelly's definitely made up ground a little bit, and I think it's even for the most part. I don't think Elway necessarily is sending an edict to Joseph to definitely get him the second team reps. I think it's just how it shakes out. And as a former first-round pick who has some experience compared to Chad Kelly, a 7th rounder who has no experience, it's just seniority rules in that case. So it's still too early, I think, but it's going to be a competition that comes down to that 4th preseason game.
What interests me is how VJ says that Chad is different. That what does that mean? My interpretation of that comes back to personality, with Chad being the alpha type and Paxton Lynch being a little bit more reserved, a little more passive, kind of the beta to Chad Kelly's alpha. That's how I interpret that. But we'll see how it shakes out. Since we're running out of time, I'm going to move this thing forward a little bit. We got to talk about this. I thought this was a unique quote. Maybe it's just me. Jared Veldheer, obviously, finally we see him on the field after him spending all the offseason on the sidelines with trainers, recovering from that ankle, hits the practice field starting Saturday, and he's been going against, you guessed it, Von Miller as the right tackle. Now, I touched on this Monday in a written piece, but Veldheer used an interesting metaphor to describe what it's like to go against Von Miller. I don't have the audio, so I'm going to read it to you. What is it like to go against Von Miller? Quote, "It gets you better. There's something new that I'm trying to focus on almost every rep. It's like that really long par 3 in golf that's really hard to hit the green, kind of like that, except running at you. It might not make sense, but until you've done that stuff, maybe you'll understand. But it's awesome. It's a great chance to be able to go against the best pass rusher in football every day. Makes me have to bring my best every day, and that only makes you better," close quote. So, an interesting metaphor. If you think about it, what would that be like? A long par 3 in golf, everyone's experienced that. If you play golf, you've experienced that, where it's really hard to land it on the green, except it's coming at you. That's what it's like to try and get your hands on Von Miller, okay? And with how stacked the AFC West is at edge rusher, especially coming off of Veldheer's side of the line, I think we should consider his battles with Von Miller to be a blessing of a disguise. What do you think, Zach?
First of all, I love that quote and that metaphor. That's great. It's only going to make him better. When he was in Arizona, he wasn't facing a pass rusher of Miller's caliber, because there is no pass rusher of Miller's caliber. He is the best pass rusher in the NFL. And to go against him every single day in practice for the entire year is only going to make him better when he faces players that are not as good as Miller. It's going to feel like a piece of cake. Yep. And like you said, in the AFC West, you have all those pass rushers with the Chiefs, and you have Bosa, and you have Melvin Ingram, and you have Khalil Mack. It's going to make it feel like he's prepared already. And if he can beat Von Miller, or at least contain him, because you can't really beat Von Miller, it's going to make the Broncos better on that right side. And hallelujah, they don't have Menelik Watson there. You never heard a quote like that from him. So, I fully agree with that.
That's right.
And I'm happy that he's here.
Amen. Now, as teased, we are unveiling a new segment entitled Debunking a Bad Take, where we're going to dissect and refute some bad analysis out there that we have found on the interwebs. And Zach and I are completely open to listener suggestions for this segment. So each week, you guys keep an eye out for bad takes. When you see something, ping us on Twitter at HuddleUpPod, or you can hit us up on our individual Twitter accounts or in the Mile High Huddle forums. But in honor of this being the inaugural episode for this segment, we'll debunk a couple of bad takes. And the first comes from Matt McChesney. Now, Zach, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I have to admit, I apologize, I didn't know who he was. But he's a trainer, gets linemen ready for the draft. His Twitter profile says he's also involved in college recruiting, etc. But McChesney appeared on Orange and Blue 760 in Denver, which, by the way, is a must-listen during camp. If you want to know what's happening in real time out on the field, tune into Orange and Blue 760 during the day. But anyway, McChesney appears, and he offers up Devontae Booker as a candidate to be a surprise cut this summer. Yeah, and, technically, this is Denver's number 1 running back on the depth chart heading into camp, but in this guy's eyes, he's the casualty. So, Zach, start us off. Tell us why this is a bad take.
Well, why is this even put out there? Like, how does that make any sort of sense at all to say that the most veteran running back on the roster, who is the best in pass protection right now, is going to be the one that's going to get cut? Why? It just makes no sense to me. He's not only going to make the roster, he's going to be probably the starting running back in week 1. He might eventually lose his job to Royce Freeman. Phillip Lindsay might make the 53. He might make some noise. But Devontae Booker is going nowhere. He's probably locked in as atop the depth chart. So to say he might be the surprise cut, it's just not going to happen. It goes beyond a bad take. It's just implausibility.
It's just a guy, all due respect, don't want to throw shade on him. I'm sure he's a great dude. He obviously knows football very well. But what this tells me is that it's a guy who hasn't really been paying attention this offseason. And it's a guy who has been unimpressed with Devontae Booker, like a lot of people in his first 2 years with the Broncos, but he hasn't been listening to what the team's been saying all offseason long. They cut their leading rusher last year because of their faith in Devontae Booker. Yeah, they didn't want to pay C.J. Anderson, but the confidence they had in saying we can afford to let him go was because of Devontae Booker. And then, a little time goes by, just so happens, then they draft Royce Freeman in the 3rd round. But they've still continued to say nothing but good things about Devontae Booker. And to your point, he's the best pass-protecting back they have on the roster. You don't think that counts? It absolutely makes a difference. Even if he was the worst running back, actual ball carrier among the 5 backs on the roster right now, just the fact that he has the best hands and can pass protect earns him a roster spot this time around. So that's what it tells me.
To me, I can't even fathom why they would cut him. And like you said, the Broncos and Vance Joseph have wanted a committee approach. And they got rid of CJ, like you said, because they wanted to give Booker more carries. And I know you and I are fans of him, Chad, but I still don't understand the hate for Devontae Booker.
Right.
He's the black sheep of this roster, and I don't know why. I don't know what he did to deserve that distinction. I think he's a very talented running back, but we'll have to see what happens.
Well, I talked to a fan today. I had a little bit of a long conversation on social media. And I think, Devontae Booker was the subject of this conversation, and I think the perception a lot of fans have, and one of the reasons why people just aren't high on Devontae Booker, is the fact that you look at his career rushing average. I think it's 3.6. It might be 3.8, but I think it's 3.6. And they go, oh, look, he can't even muster 4 yards. Well, the thing you got to keep in mind with Devontae Booker is if you go back and watch his Utah tape, this was a guy that was consistently getting to the 2nd and 3rd level, as a running back. Then you get to the pros, and he's having a hard time breaking tackles. He's just not elusive. And what's the difference? Is it just because of the speed of the game? It's better athletes in the NFL. What is it? And while that might have something to do with it, the thing you have to really factor in here is that Devontae Booker has not had a healthy season in the NFL yet. As a rookie, in which he led the team in rushing, I remind everybody, Devontae Booker was coming off a botched knee surgery. He had it during the college football season, and then had to have a cleanup procedure on it because it wasn't a very good surgery done by when it actually took place. So he had to have that redone. I think it was like in January. Then he gets drafted, so he's slowly working back from this knee surgery. Then he gets called on in week 7 to fill in for C.J. Anderson, who's now torn his ACL. He's done, or MCL, whatever it was, knee injury done. Goes on to carry the team as a leading rusher. And so then you fast forward to his 2nd year. Last year, he suffers that wrist injury, and he's never quite himself. You start seeing him kind of get back to the Devontae Booker that we recognize from his time at Utah down the stretch. But by then, the season's over, and the fans aren't looking for silver linings. I mean, it's full-on Bronco apocalypse, 5-11. So I think that's the big thing. And so the bright side is this. Booker is entering his 3rd season. I think we could see a quantum leap from him, but especially because Zach is finally healthy.
Yeah, and it's also the sample size is that he's a backup, and the Broncos don't have the best run-blocking offensive line, at least the last couple of years. I mean, if he gets less carries, and the yards per carry average really doesn't matter to me. It's like a QB rating. It's not the end-all, be-all as to what a running back could be in the NFL. So I don't put too much stock in that. I'm just a bigger fan of Devontae Booker than most, I guess. I think he could be a really good starter for this team. If not a starter, definitely a passing down, 3rd down back. After Royce Freeman comes in the game and takes those early down touches, I think he's the perfect lightning to Freeman's thunder.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out, but he's definitely not going to be a guy that ends up on the cutting room floor.
No, not at all.
Our second bad take was brought to our attention by a listener. We put it out on Twitter. And apparently Bleacher Report put out, so 8 of Bleacher Report's quote-unquote NFL experts voted on their choice for AFC West champions, who's going to win the AFC West. And the distribution of votes was as follows. The Chargers received 4 of the 8 votes, the Chiefs 2, the Raiders 2, and you guessed it, that leaves 0 for the Broncos. So here's the thing. I can understand, Zach, why some analysts around the NFL are so high on the Chargers. I mean, you look at the talent on both sides of the ball and the fact that they have a proven, prolific veteran quarterback still. I get it. Even if I disagree with them, I at least understand why everyone's crowning the Chargers. But for the Broncos to receive 0 votes, and yet the Chiefs and Raiders each received 2, I mean, you've got a Raiders team that's going through a complete changing of the guard, so to speak. You got a guy at head coach who hasn't coached for a decade, and you're expecting them to do better than the Broncos. Then the Chiefs, they're also going through a transitional era, going from the franchise quarterback that is or was Alex Smith to the essentially rookie quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. So I just don't understand that. I don't understand how the Chiefs could get 2, the Raiders could get 2, the Broncos get 0. But what are your thoughts on this particular take?
What a surprise. The media disrespects the Broncos. It happens every offseason, it seems like. And it's happened many times this offseason alone. Sports Illustrated predicted the Broncos would finish, I think, 4-12 this season. Right. A loss less than they had last year with a much better roster. Doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. There's always so much bulletin board material out there. And this is no different here. But like you said, I can understand it. Every other team, the Chargers have that quarterback in Phillip Rivers. They have a pretty stacked defense. The Chiefs have a great coach in Andy Reid. The Raiders have John Gruden back. The Broncos are that unknown with a lame duck head coach and a retooled roster and many different moving parts. I can understand why they get 0 votes. I don't agree with it. I think they should have got 1. But Chargers are snake bit right now. So they've injury after injury after injury.
Never ends.
And the Broncos, they're kind of up and coming in that division. So it's just more disrespect. It's more bulletin board material for the Broncos to feed on. And they do. They like being the underdogs. They thrive on that. You saw that in 2015 in the Super Bowl season with Carolina. They love being disrespected, and it fuels them. So this can only help them, even if it is a really, truly horrible take.
Yeah, I mean, Bleacher Report, hats off to them, rock on, salute. You guys, salute, whatever. But you can't read too much into it. It's just media trying to create content and doing their best to add a little bit of analysis behind it. So again, though, you guys, when you see a bad take, hit us up, let us know about it. We'll take a look, see if it's something we want to address and debunk on the show. Now, before we get out of here, let's take some time to take a peek inside the Mile High Mailbag, because Zach and I are your football priests. We're here to offer absolution and answers to your burning Broncos question. And our first question comes via Jacob Smith on Twitter. Jacob, of course, a great longtime listener of the show, Mile High Huddle VIP subscriber, huge Broncos fan, and he really knows football. His question, Zach, is how is the third cornerback competition shaping up so far? Brock hopefully gets better soon, but I think Yadam will compete hard for that spot. And we know, just a quick side note, Zach, we obviously got a report on Monday that Brock was receiving a lot of reps at the number 2 corner over Bradley Roby. But your answer for Jacob.
Well, Brock, I think, also missed the walkthrough with an injury, if I recall correctly, today. So I don't know what the deal is there, but he will be healthy. And I don't think Yadam is in the competition or in the mix to compete at that spot. Whoever loses that battle between Roby and Brock will get the number 3 spot. And then even then, I think Yadam will compete with Brendan Langley and Marcus Rios for that dime spot. So Yadam, he's a developmental guy. They drafted him in the 3rd round like Langley last year. To build him up in that no-fly zone to kind of ease him in there. But Brock, I like that pickup. A lot of Broncos fans did not like that, but I think he was a good, sneaky veteran addition who, when healthy and used in the right scheme, could be a good addition to this defense. So whoever wins that second corner spot between Roby and I think it will be him, that number 3 will be Brock. I think that's already locked into place.
He was a solid pickup. I'm not going to throw shade on Tremaine Brock. It's been a while. The NFL is a what have you done for me lately league, and it's been a while since Brock's done anything. But he still has thrown up a couple of really good seasons as a former undrafted player. So I think it was a solid, under-the-radar veteran pickup, especially for the price tag, whatever it was, $4 million if he hits all the escalators on his deal. But I still don't understand why they are pitting Bradley Roby in any kind of a real competition or taking any reps away from him as that number 2 corner on the outside. Maybe there's some kind of master plan that we're not seeing up to this point, but I don't see any reason when you're paying a guy $9.5 million or whatever it is for Roby on his 5th-year option as a former first-round pick. You need to see if this is the guy that can be your shutdown corner of the future. Why you're giving up precious reps for him to continue to develop to a journeyman like Tremaine Brock that's here on a 1-year short-term deal. So we'll see. But we're running out of time, so I'm going to move through this. Next question, it's a juicy one, comes from Driscoll Jones on Twitter. Also a great listener of the show. Phenomenal football conversation on Twitter. What up? For the first 2 days of camp, all I heard was how the offense dominated the defense, but today the guys had on shells, and you didn't hear how great the offense was. Does having shells and pads on make a difference for the offense performance-wise? And I'll just say this real quick before I serve it up to you, Zach. It wasn't quite as many outgoing wow moments from those in attendance, but if you go back and watch some of the highlights, I would encourage you again to go to the Broncos YouTube and check out that clip from day 3. A lot of offensive fireworks going on today.
Yeah, I was going to say the offense still had a pretty good day today, so it's not like the defense dominated them. The Case Keenum still had good passes, and they were moving the ball, so in terms of answering the question, though, pads and shells really only help, when they had goal line drills and when teams can hit in training camp. And with the CBA, the teams can't do that anymore. So that's more of an indicator as to what the players could be. I know Vance Joseph wants to see the running backs in pads to see who stands out among that group. Probably Royce Freeman because he's that big banger. It doesn't really lend too much insight into what a player can be. The bigger test will become when the games start counting and they start going against other teams that can play real football. Right now, it's still practice in the truest sense.
I mean, I think the biggest difference as far as shells and pads is when the pads go on, you're really starting to see where the bear craps in the woods at the point of attack. So you want to pay attention to whether or not the offensive line is getting any push in the running game, whether they're able to open up any holes, because now they're in full pads and they can use their size as a real weapon, even though it's against teammates. I mean, they're going to be playing at full speed, popping each other. So you want to watch kind of where the points of attack are, the offensive line, and then on the other side of the ball, the front seven. So, but again, getting back to the offense thing, I don't think they took a step back on Monday. It just was maybe not quite as many eye-popping plays, but if you go back and watch that highlight clip, there was plenty to see there. But last question, then we're out of here, comes from Josh in Centennial from Twitter. His question, how long before Royce Freeman is named the starter, Zach?
If he's named the starter, I wouldn't really chalk it up to being a sure thing just yet because, like I said, I am higher on Devontae Booker than most others. And if he steps up in that starting role, I think he could retain the job. But playing devil's advocate, though, if he does lose his job, it will happen midseason. And I think when Freeman gets his legs under him, figuratively and literally, adjust to the game and where he fits in this offense. So I'm going to say like week 6 to week 8, if Devontae Booker is still that purely passing back and Freeman can come in on early downs. But regardless, though, my personal feelings that the Broncos will have a true committee.
Yeah.
And that's Freeman, that's Booker, that's Lindsey, and that's Henderson. Maybe all 4 running backs get touches this season. But if he does win that starting job, I don't think it's going to happen in training camp, barring an injury. I think it will happen sometime in midseason.
Yeah, and you know what? I like Freeman. His odds at becoming that lead rusher that the Broncos are looking for. I think he offers more as a pure runner than Devontae Booker, but he's not as polished as a receiver, and he's not as proficient as a pass blocker, which makes him not as valuable necessarily for all 3 downs. So to Zach's point, I think you're going to see a pretty fair and balanced running back by committee for most of the season, barring some kind of serious injury to one of the top 2 guys. So we'll see how that continues to shake out, and we're 10 days from the first game against the Minnesota Vikings will come to town August 11th. So we'll start to see a little bit more how it's shaking out, how it's all coming together when they go up against outside competition in a real game scenario. But that's all the time we have for today, you guys. You can find my partner, Zack Kelberman, on Twitter, at Kelberman247, myself, at Chad and Jensen. Make sure you're subscribing, y'all. Make sure you're taking some time to leave a creative review, and keep your eye out for some bad takes. Ping us, hit us up if you see something. We'll talk to you next week. For Zack Kelberman, I'm Chad Jensen. See you soon.
Mile High Huddle.